How are we this morning? I'm sorry. I'm a type A personality. Need better than that. How are we this morning? Good. There we go. When Marissa Mayer took over at Yahoo, she created some big changes. One of the things she did to implement her vision was extend maternity leave. She not only gave the mothers longer time to take off after having a baby, but she included the fathers, and she increased the pay. When she did that, a lot of people called her a leader. Sir Richard Branson, in his Virgin Group network of companies, runs 400 companies under that brand. He is so focused on the customer experience that he trains his staff differently. He treats his employees differently because the customer is near and dear to his heart above all profit and loss. In many ways, we look at Richard Branson and say, that man's a leader. When Miss Colorado, Kelly Johnson, took the stage in the Miss America pageant, and she defied tradition and didn't twirl a baton or sing or read poetry, she came out in a nurse's uniform. And she talked about how important it was to her to relate to her patients and what it meant to have a calling in service, and inspired little girls all over the world to want to be nurses. We call Kelly Johnson a leader. How many of you think leaders are born? How many of you think leaders are made? Amen. I think leaders are made too. I think every single one of you has the ability, has the power to lead. And what I mean by that is I think every one of you has the ability and the power to influence, impact, and inspire the people you want to lead. Now, we might not all have the skills or the resources to lead a company or even a community or maybe even a country, but we have the ability to make a difference in the lives of the people that we choose to lead. That's the art of leadership. That's the passion of leadership. And I think every single one of you, if you choose, can be leaders. So how do you do that? Well, first you have to get really clear with yourself. You have to have a really good understanding of who you are before you try to lead me. In my first book, as Katie mentioned, my first book, Reputation Management 360, Creating Power Through Personal Branding, I laid out the steps of how to build a personal brand. But you know what? I didn't call it a leadership book. In that book, you have every tool you need to build a personal brand. But I'm not assuming you want to be a leader, because not everyone does. Not everyone wants to lead, and that's okay. Imagine if everybody wanted to lead. Who would follow? Who would be inspired? Who would be motivated? So it's really your choice if you want to lead. Let's say you do want to lead. How do you do that? Well, my lane is personal branding. I teach people how to build a personal brand that's compelling and relevant. And if you want to build your personal brand as a leader, here's how you do that. First step is discover. This is the hardest part of personal branding, is actually doing the discovery piece, because that's where you get inside yourself and figure out who you are. Personal branding, it's interesting, as a practice is really simple. I mean, when I talk in front of groups, I say I have one really complicated formula, like that's it. It's a really simple process to build a personal brand, but it's not easy. Because getting inside yourself, discovering who you are, moves you out of your comfort zone. It means you've got to ask yourself some really tough questions. The first question is, why me? Why me? What makes me special? What makes me valuable and unique and compelling and relevant and attractive? Why me? You have to understand that, because the people you're going to lead, the people you're going to inspire and influence, they don't have time to figure that out for you. You have to be clear on why you. The second part of the discover process is understanding your values. Talk about a tough one. Understanding your values means getting really clear about what you stand for. What do you believe in? What inspires you? What is so core to your moral fiber that if it was separated from your skin, you wouldn't be you? Those are your values. And oftentimes we think about the obvious ones, right? Honesty, transparency, trust, hardworking, dedication. If I had a dime for every time somebody gave me those values, I'd be very, very rich. Your values are very personal to you. One of the exercises I did when I first started my company 7.5 years ago is I took myself through the discover process. And in doing that, I realized that my values center on gratitude and generosity. At the end of my life, that's what I want to be known for. Understanding those values means I have to act that way if I'm going to be credible. The formula for credibility is values plus action. The only way you're going to be credible as a leader is to be really clear on your values. What do you stand for? And walk the talk. What's the action? How do you put your money where your mouth is if you're telling me that's your value? Again, really, really tough questions, but very simple and straightforward. The next part of the discover process is understanding who you want to be relevant to. Who's your target audience? Shocking as it may be, you are not going to be relevant, compelling, attractive, and funny to everybody. I know, that was very hard for me to get. But when you can identify that group, or that community, or that industry, or that person that you want to lead, that you want to impact and influence and inspire, then you do everything you can to learn about that person. Who's motivating that person? What motivates that person? What inspires them? Who influences them? What are their likes and dislikes? What's the geography that impacts them? You have to understand your target audience because that gives you focus, that gives you intention. And the last part of the discover process is what we call legacy. And that is to actually go way out in the distance to the point where we're very old and our life has been full and say, how do I want to be remembered? How do I want the people that I interacted with to remember me? Did I inspire them? If so, how? For what? How did I make them feel? When you can create a legacy for yourself, when you can be really clear about what that desired brand is, you've just given yourself the tool and the gift of control. Because when I know what I want in the future, I can start being that today. So when I started going through the process and I said, I want to be remembered at the end of my life as someone who was generous and grateful. I want to be remembered as someone who gave way more than she took, and she took a lot. It started affecting the clients that I chose, the people that I wanted to mentor and lead, the kinds of projects I wanted to lend my name to, the way I show up, the way that I look and my body language. Every touch point, I filter through that desired reputation. That's how powerful the discover process is. Helps you answer why. It helps you figure out your value proposition, your values, and how you want to be credible. It helps you identify your target audience and gives you the power to create a legacy for yourself now. And I'm looking around the room, everybody's very young. So the day that our legacy actually happens is very far off in the future. But you have those tools now. That's the discover process. Next comes design. Building a personal brand as a leader means you put strategy to this. I consider your reputation to be the most valuable asset you have. Your credentials, your skills, your experience, your training, those are fantastic. But if I can't trust you, if I don't know about you, if I don't know that other people speak highly of you and think that you're a leader, then really it doesn't matter because I put you in a commodity lineup. So you have to design a strategy for yourself that's going to take you from point A to point B. That might feel weird. That might feel maybe even a little bit disingenuous. But personal branding is all about authenticity, so let me just dispel that right now. Your strategy has to be there. You have to have a measurable, marketable strategy. No one's going to know about you. You're not going to get credit unless you market yourself. So the strategy part says, this is where I am today, this is where I want to get, and these are the steps I'm going to take. This is how I'm going to measure success along the way. If I want to be an influencer in my company, and I want to lead a team to a higher level of success, I'm going to benchmark where we are now, I'm going to know what the milestones are that I'm looking to achieve, and when I hit those, I'm going to know I was successful. That's how we measure success. The third step in building your personal brand as a leader is to deploy. It's to take all the discovery, all the assets that you've built for yourself, the designed strategy that you articulated and outlined, and put it to motion. Put it out into motion. It means that someone like me who says, I want to be known as someone who is generous and grateful, says, okay, what am I going to do about that? In 2009, I was told what I'm going to do about that. I became aware that our military veterans in this country don't have the same access to the tools that we're discussing today. They take the uniform off and they step into our world and they're lost and they're struggling. And for me, as a person who's grateful, I found that really unfortunate. So I raised my hand and I started leaning in. I put my money where my mouth was and I started volunteering. That was 6 years ago. Today, not only am I a writer for military.com, an entrepreneur magazine on the topic of military, But I wrote this book last year, which was endorsed by General Peter Pace, who was the 16th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and several other military leaders at the Pentagon, because I gave the tool for military veterans transitioning. I created the platform. I am a leader in that space. Me, a civilian living here in Colorado who has no understanding of military, became a leader in a space that could not be more foreign from anything that I'm used to. But I leaned in. It was part of my brand. It was my mission to create a platform for our military veterans. That's the deploy. And deploying your strategy doesn't mean perfection. Lord knows I am not perfect. Well, close, but no. I am not perfect, but I am consistent. And I would ask you, when you look at marketing yourself, which is that the deploy piece, look at social media. Look at your interpersonal relationships. Look at the way you're showing up and dressing and your body language, your eye contact, your narrative, the words that you're choosing. Are they consistent with the kind of leader you want to be? Because if they're not, the world is too skeptical. They'll move on to someone else. They'll look for inspiration, impact, and influence for someone else. So I do think all of you have the capability to be leaders. You might want to be global leaders. You might want to be leaders of your team or your company or your industry. But if you choose to, you have to do the hard work up front. You have to build your credibility, your value proposition before you can get anyone else to enlist. And then you discover who you are and why you want to be a leader. You design a strategy and you deploy it. And every day you get closer and closer to that milestone. So who wants to be a leader? All right. Thank you so much for your time this morning.